Do you feel like you need God's encouragement and wisdom throughout the week to take hold of His promise to fly like an eagle? You come to the right place. Welcome to Eagles on the Hill. Let's join our host, Pastor Jeff Scheich.
Hey, people, I am your host, Pastor Jeff Scheich. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the podcast. Today, I am excited to welcome a friend and hero of mine, Pastor Joe Beran, to the podcast. Pastor Joe grew up at Christ in Lincoln, and known him since he was in probably elementary school or something like that. And now he's a pastor and has become one of the leaders of our Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, pastor in California. So we want to welcome him to the podcast. Pastor Joe, say hi to the people.
Hey, everybody. Good to be on. I love that intro, Pastor Scheich. That was awesome.
Hey, that was great. A real radio announcer voice there, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so one of the reasons we're having, aside from just my admiration for Joe, is he has written a book called The Ends of the LCMS, and kind of an intriguing title. And so I got a chance to preview this before it came out. It's a great book, available to you on Amazon. If you'd like to order it, you can just go to Amazon and order Ends of the LCMS. I want to know, Joe, first of all, what in the world possessed you to write a book, and what's it about?
Yeah. So there's a few different kind of motivations and places that it comes from, but a good chunk of it comes from being in California is a little bit more secular, a little more post-Christian. And then on top of that, it was kind of coming across some data and some projections that was out there. So the book kind of falls into two major categories, and I use as a metaphor throughout it a struggle that I had in my life where when I was going to seminary, my body started acting weird where like my wrist would lock up and my ankle would lock up. And eventually, after seeing a few doctors, I got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And that realization as to, oh yeah, this is why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. And makes sense for some of the changes, helped me to kind of say, these are some things that I could do moving forward because of that. And I think similarly for the church right now, as we move into a little bit more of a post-Christian context in America, where, if you go back into the 1960s, an overwhelming majority of Americans were church-going, God-fearing people. It's what separated us from the communist Russians back then. That's changed to where Christians are becoming more of a minority in America. And so the book kind of looks at some of the data of what that means for the church body that we're in, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And then in the second half, kind of asks some questions of are there changes that we're willing to make or that we want to talk about moving forward?
So it's really a great, insightful book. And so if you were to say, what would be helpful for us as Christians living in a post-Christian culture, what kinds of things would what would you say to that?
Yeah. So I think a really, really helpful, tangible thing for most Christians, and it seems kind of obvious, but don't ever assume a lot of Christianity on and in for people, right? Like people don't understand biblical narratives like they used to, or Bible stories. However, what's fascinating is people are still very open to spiritual conversations. It's not that people are no longer Christian and they have rejected God and they believe in atheism and things like that. A lot of times there's ambiguity that people believe. And so it's possible, and I would encourage you to not be afraid to kind of have spiritual conversations with people and to talk to them about what you believe. But at the same time, don't kind of take for granted this idea of like, oh yeah, they kind of know the Bible story and what Jesus is all about, because more and more that's not going to be the case.
Right. And but yet people still have that hole in their heart, that St. Augustine talked about, right? That only God can fill, and they're trying to fill it in all sorts of ways, and we have the answer, right? So, yeah. How did now you grew up at Christ Lincoln, went to 211 as I remember in middle school, high school, going to 211. How did growing up at Christ influence some of the ideas you have behind this book? For instance, I'm going to answer part of that if I could.
Yeah.
Could I do that? Yeah.
Yes.
I love how you started out in the world with your rheumatoid arthritis. And people can, even if you don't have that, which I don't have it, but I can identify with some of the things you're saying in terms of the choices you had to make. Am I going to make lifestyle changes? Am I going to make these changes or not? And that's going to determine how things are going to go. And you use that kind of as a parable preaching to then apply to the church and to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But maybe that's not what you were going to say. Not the question, in which case I already answered it. But
No, no, you're good.
what were you going to say? What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think one thing that was kind of implemented on me at a younger age, which is that 211 kind of idea, which says, how do we present the gospel in such a way that people will hear it in their own tongue and hear it in a way that it speaks to that, Augustinian idea of our souls are restless until they rest in you, O Lord. Um, I think that what's fascinating is when I was growing up, I used to get really big into like apologetics, right? And worldview, foundations, truth. How do we argue for these sorts of things? And what I've come to learn as I've continued to talk with more people outside of the church, is people are far less often inspired by arguments over the truth and are far
Mm,
more often moved by showing them what is good and what is beautiful about Jesus
mm,
and Christianity. And so that's
mm,
that's like something that I think has been helpful in my own life, and that kind of the 211 idea from a young age of saying, how do we present the gospel in such a way it resonates with people, is
mm,
something that is so vitally important in that. And so I pray
mm,
that I have a little bit, I think, that I talk about that earlier in the book, quoting from Apologetics of the Cross as a really good kind of read on that sort of a thing. But the other thing too about Christ is, with you having like all sorts of different services and things like that too, like there still is kind of options for, what
mhm.
really resonates with people in that way. So
Yeah, yeah. I see if this is kind of an example of what you're talking about. I've
mhm.
read, of course, when the church began, it was in the Roman era, very well. It wasn't post-Christian. Christian hadn't happened yet, but in the
Pre-Christian, yeah.
pre-Christian era, right in the Roman Empire, that one of the things that, among a number of things that helped um, advance the spread of the gospel was the way that Christians lived. I mean, they'll know they are Christians by our love, right? They'll know we are Christians by our love. So the way they lived, the way godly husbands cared for their wives, the way they cared for the sick and the infirm, the sexual ethic of Christians lived out became a beautiful thing in the face of a culture that the sexual ethic was horrible, to say the least. And so people were drawn to like you said, the beauty of the Christian life. And that was what part of what grew the church. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, that very much so. I think the more Christians can live kind of countercultural lives that reflect that beauty that people are longing for, the more that people will look upon Christians in an inquiring way, saying, I want to learn more about who Jesus of Nazareth is and
Mm,
what it means to follow him. I'm reminded from what you shared of a few different historic examples. Like I remember reading a while back ago about a plague that took place that was spreading throughout Rome in, I want to say, the fourth or fifth century. And there's a quote by a historian about how as everyone else is leaving the city, because
mhm,
this is spreading and people don't want to get infected, Christians were the ones that were known as going into the city to care for the people who were left there, who were sick
mhm,
and diseased and dying, because they realized like, hey, I know what's going to happen to me when I die, so I want to make
right,
sure that I can be there to care for those who need it. And then, oh man, there's so many cool historic examples of this. There is
right.
a man who one of the emperors sent to go and check out kind of in the early church in the third century to see like, what is this group called the Way? What's going on here? This is kind of strange. And there's this beautiful letter that he writes back to the king where he just says, their way, okay, oh Lord, is something divine. If any one of them has need, another one fasts and gives up their food for 2 or 3 days. And like, it just paints this picture
Mm,
of disciples having all things in common. It's a
mhm,
beautiful thing that I think the more we can dive deeper into our faith in the midst of this and say, what does it mean to live this out, the better off it'll
mhm.
be.
Mhm. Yeah, those are some real positive, uplifting things. I'm gonna turn the table though and say, what kinds of things, as you research the statistics, what made you nervous? What are the things that
Yeah.
caused you to go, "Oh my goodness."
So, what's funny is when my generation was in college, there was research done, I think, like 2009 by David Kinnaman and Barna, and the overwhelming feeling from non-Christians about Christians where they were hypocritical, judgmental, and
Mhm.
anti-homosexual. It's just the top three things.
Mhm.
Um, and those really haven't changed. If anything, they've intensified on like the two political front and the hypocritical
Mhm.
front. And so I I think there's a lot of room for us to kind of intentionally say, how do we make sure that on the one hand we are called as citizens of America to say, we want to vote our conscience and do what's right, but in the other to say
Mhm.
our hope is in Jesus. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and to have that kind of balance. It's a challenge preaching when, there's gonna be guests in the room every week, like every Sunday is somebody's first Sunday here at Christ,
Mhm.
and so how do you we have to be careful to know, the key thing is the gospel of Jesus,
That's
but then
right.
have avenues to be able to live out, our faith in the left-hand kingdom, the political kingdom as well as, talk about the hard realities of life. So what makes you excited about things in the future? Do you think the church has
Yeah.
does the church have a future, or is it gonna die, Joe?
Oh, hey, Jesus is Lord of the church. The church absolutely has a future, and it's so interesting because I think we a lot of times kind of obsess over ourselves a little bit, or we just see our picture of the world as Americans. The church globally is thriving and is doing really well. There's a book called "Will the Religious Inherit the Earth?" that kind of looks at this question because there are some people
Mhm,
that have said, "Well, as the world gets more technologically advanced, will we all just become secular and will religion kind of fall to the past?" And the author comes to the conclusion that no, actually, that doesn't seem to be the case from the data we have so far.
mm,
But the thing that I'm excited about is I think that as there is kind of this winnowing, as things kind of shift, I think it'll prayerfully and hopefully a new kind of branch of what it looks like to in a dedicated countercultural early church kind of way follow Jesus is
mm,
going to emerge. So I'm looking forward to that. One thing I didn't mention as much on the last question on what I'm nervous about is I do think a lot of the structures and a lot of the things that we've kind of traditionally built ourselves on really existed in like a Christian era where you could assume Christianity in society. So there's going to be some weird kind of growing pains with that stuff,
mhm.
but I'm excited to see what God has planned in the future. So,
Yeah, things are gonna change, and we gotta not be afraid of that, but follow Jesus wherever he leads us, as a church. So, yeah. That's good, good stuff. Well, again, I'd highly recommend the book, to purchase that book from Amazon, The Ends of the LCMS, and by that, when I first saw the title, it was I read it as the end of the LCMS, like we're done, we're gone. But then I realized, no, wait a minute, it's ends, and you're really talking about what is our purpose, what is our mission as Christians, but as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and of
that's
course,
right.
our mission is to seek and save the lost. Our mission is to reach another person for Jesus, and by our actions, by our words, to do that. So I'm very grateful for the practical ways that you talk about in the book as well, for not only individuals but for us as a church body to be thinking about as we move ahead, as we try to cure our rheumatoid arthritis, shall we say, as we try to get healed and continue to move in the right direction. So thanks for being here. Hey, Joe, before you go, I'm going to surprise you here. Hold on, I'm going to put something on the
Okay.
screen. You recognize this, Joe?
Yes,
If
I
you're on
do.
YouTube,
Yes.
there's a picture. If you're not on YouTube, you won't see this, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. But the picture on the screen is called "The Order of the Fountain," and 7 books by Joe's wife Sarah. So I happen to know that she's an author. She's written, I don't know, 12 or 15 books by now or so. So Joe, tell us about Sarah's books, if you would, just as we
Yeah,
close.
yeah. So about 3 years ago, my wife just picked up writing as a hobby. She'd done it a little bit in her youth, and so the series that you have up right there is kind of creative retelling of some classic fairy tales, like you have Peter Pan, Little Mermaid, all of those, Jack and the Beanstalk, kind of scattered throughout the books in the same world. And it's an awesome series. Really enjoy it. Although I'll never forget, there's one reviewer who said of it, if you can get past the Christian propaganda woven throughout it, it's pretty good. So
Well, that's what we're looking for, man.
yeah, yeah.
This because other books have a lot of other propaganda in them, so that's good. I'm glad she's doing that. So anyway, check out Sarah Beran, Beran, on Amazon, and you can find her books there. And so we recommend those to you. So So proud of her for all of her work with those. Anyway, Pastor Joe, thanks for joining us, and thanks especially for your ministry and your leadership in the church in California and the church of our LCMS. Thanks for being part of this.
Thank you, Pastor Scheich. It's a blessing to be here.
All right. Well, that's what we got for you today. We want to encourage you to write us at eaglesonthehill211@gmail.com. That's all one word, eaglesonthehill211@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of this particular podcast. If you want to get a hold of Pastor Joe, you can write us there and I'll forward that to him. I want to let you just remind you as we close to take hold of that promise of God in Isaiah 40, that those who hope in the Lord will fly on wings like eagles. And we do hope in the Lord and trust him to be blessing us in our lives, no matter what the circumstances are that we face. Thanks for joining us.